So yeah, this is the panel all about teletext recovery. We've got our panelists here. So on my right, as we've said, we've got Chris Bell, who is the creator of Superpage 58, the preeminent Digitiser fan site and archive.
Wow, thank you.
We've got Jason Robertson, who is a master teletext recovery expert. So you've been scraping teletext out of the ether for several years now. And here, to my immediate left, we've got Peter Kwan, who worked on teletext back in the day, back when teletext was actually still a thing, and you've worked closely with lots and lots of teletext technology. So I guess, can we start with you, Peter? Could you tell us, just sort of set the scene, and this is a really basic question, but how does teletext actually work? What actually is it?
Well, in the 70s, the BBC wanted to add some digital, what to distribute text. And somebody had the bright idea of putting some unused lines at the top of the screen to good use. What happened in TV is that the picture scanned rows, and because of the old technology of wobbly old CRTs, they had to do something called overscanning. So that meant the picture was much bigger than you could actually see because of all the curved bits at the edge. So somebody at the BBC thought they could make use of these extra lines at the top, which you can't normally see. And they came up with the idea of teletext, and they worked on it at the same time as ITV, and they came up with two incompatible systems. Then somebody decided to knock their heads together, and I think it was 1976 that they came to a common standard which they would use in Britain, and that took off pretty quickly, and other companies followed, and it was the best thing before the internet until about 10 years ago when they switched it off.
And since what was your role in when you worked for MRG Systems, and when you worked since? What have you been building? What was your contribution to teletext?
I did special units for the BBC that nobody at home would see. But MRG Systems did lots of the blue rack units, and if you went into Television Centre, you'd see a whole stack of them. They were distributing subtitles and Teefax through BBC 1 and 2, and they didn't just have to buy one set, they had to buy a backup set for each channel. So we sold them a lot of blue boxes, and it was my job to check to make sure that the software is running that sent the teletext out of the BBC. One of the later things I did was PDC, which I don't know if anybody remembers that. It used to they used to send signals that if you'd programmed your VCR to record a program at a particular time, it would know exactly when that program started and would switch on your VCR for you. So it was called program delivery code. So I did the revamp of that. And I can tell you the code for that before I fixed it was pretty awful. So people tended to miss the first 5 minutes of their program, so I fixed that.
But crucially, we can thank you for being able to take stuff and not miss things back before catch up and everything else. That's basically all thanks to you.
So I did a lot of that. We did a lot of work with bookies as well, because they sent data through their own TV networks, and we even worked at Farnborough Airport. There was a system sending the weather to the control tower. So instead of running around with bits of paper, somebody would type it in at the console, and then a quarter of a second later it would appear on all of the screens in the building. So it was the fastest way of getting information around. And they only switched that off 3 years ago. So there was still Teefax running, but teletext running, but you had to be in the control room of Farnborough to see it.
Cool. So, Jason, what's your story with teletext? Were you into teletext back in the day, or were you like me? Did you just stroll through teletext services, consuming every bit of teletext? Is that just me who went through page after page after page of teletext?
No, that was me as well.
Oh, good.
I was just a regular viewer of teletext, really, but late 90s, I think, I found a page on the internet which was somebody had archived an entire series of pages from the 1980s. And I just spent a couple of hours going through every page and reading it. It's quite nostalgic to do. I thought that was fantastic. And then about 2010, I started to use a Teletext, a PC card on Teletext to record Teletext services because Teletext was going to be closing. I thought I'll archive a few services. And about the same time, I started work on an emulator for it, so that you'd be able to play back those recorded services when they eventually turned Teletext off. So it's kind of a digital preservation sort of thing, really, effort there. And then in the 2012, on a Teletext mailing list, Alistair Buxton announced that he developed a way of fetching teletext from videotape, which I thought was a remarkable invention, and I'm trying that out as soon as I can. He's here in fact today, Alistair, so he's around. So massive thanks to Alistair. There he is at the back waving there. It's Alistair's software that made it all possible. I've been dining out on that ever since. So from 2012 onwards, I think for the past 7 years, the computer has been constantly fetching teletext from videotape. It can be a quite slow process, it can be quite quick, but at the moment there are 1,900 services in the archive from 1976 up until 2015, something like that.
Crikey. So before we talk about how the recovery process works, then this is a really neat point to move on to Chris, because you created Superpage 58 in I think 1997, back when Digitiser was still on our screens.
It was still on the air. It was in its pomp, I think we could probably say at that point. It had probably started to gain a real cult following then. Biffo was there on his own after Mr. Hare had left the previous year, and he was very much putting his own humour into it at that point. It just happened really that I'd started a course at uni, and they asked as an assignment to do a website. Everyone had to put a website together in the class, and I was struggling to think about what it should be on, and I thought, well, we've done a Digitiser website. I know a lot about that. So I just started to record things from memory, and there was the Digitiser website itself at that point, the official one on the teletext.co.uk site, but it wasn't very good. It certainly didn't have any of the hallmark humour on there. It seemed to be some of the teletext was shying away from, like it was the dirty secret. Like, we'll put the articles up, but nothing of what people actually come here for. So that they had archived all the reviews going back to about probably 95. So not all the way back to the beginning, but they had a lot of material there. So I went through all the stuff that I could find and picked out the juicy bits and started to build a quotes page, and then from memory characters, and then just built it from there. But never intended to go public particularly.
Given it's still a website that you're working on and maintaining, there's not a professor somewhere so waiting for you to hand something in at the end of it?
I have no idea what mark I got for it at the time. The funny thing is we had to peer review each other's sites for the assignment, so God knows what the guy thought it was. I do remember, because I was looking through all the reviews that people had written about each other's sites, and he'd written something along the lines of, I don't know what it's about, but he's got a good links page.
So I think the archive thing is fascinating. So the reason I volunteered to do this panel is because I'm a technology journalist. A couple of years ago, I discovered the teletext scene and was immediately sort of captivated by it, because ultimately the thing I'm sort of paranoid about is archiving. That we have this teletext at its peak at one point, so it was being used by something like 18 million people a week in Britain. I'm sure I read that statistic in a book somewhere. And then it just sort of disappeared overnight, and nobody seems to be archiving this. The BBC don't have a Teefax archive, ITV or Teletext Limited don't have a teletext archive. So all of this journalism, all of this content that was affecting so many people's lives and was read by so many people, just sort of disappeared. And so when I discovered recovery, being able to bring these pages back from the dead, I was sort of blown away, and because the technology behind it is amazing, and also we're able to recreate things. I remember Mr. Biffo, Paul, what should we call him? Biffo. He wrote once about how when he updated Digitiser back in the day, he would literally just log on to the computer he wrote Digitiser on and write that day's update, literally overwriting the previous day's content and then uploading that straight to the Teletext servers. So it's not like he was writing it somewhere and keeping an archive. It's not like there was another version of it. The Teletext was all we had, and it seemed to have disappeared. But then Alistair invented a means to recover this. So Jason and Peter, would you be able to talk a bit about how the recovery process actually works? So say I've got a bunch of old VHS tapes. Say I taped something on Channel 4 in 1998. How would I go about getting an old Digitiser from that?
What you would do is you would have to sample the videotape. So you need a VCR, put the tape in the VCR, you connect the VCR to a PC card. The PC card then needs some special software that Alistair wrote, which would sample what we call the VBI. So it's all the wiggly lines at the top of the screen, it would sample those. In much the same way that you would sample a piece of music. And so once it's converted from the analog signal to digital data, it then goes through what we call deconvolution process, which basically, what deconvolution is simply is that you have, coming in from the video, you have signal plus noise. If we can find out what the noise is, we can subtract that from the signal plus noise to get the signal back. And that's kind of what deconvolution is, briefly. And that's what Alistair software does. And what comes out is raw teletext data, and we can display that in a number of methods. We can use HTML or other various ways of displaying the teletext data back.
So just to underscore this, because I think this is genuinely amazing. So I don't know if anyone ever used to use a VCR, play a video, and then you press text and you just see basically a black screen because the videotape itself wasn't capable of storing all of the teletext data. And the way the recovery works, as I understand it, is basically because the data is each frame of a videotape has a couple of teeny tiny bits of teletext data. If you take sort of 10 different instances of the same teletext page from across the tape, you can basically match them all together and recreate this page from the little scraps of data all together.
Yeah, the pages that come out of the recovery process aren't perfect, but as you say, you can integrate multiple copies of them. And for example, if you've got in 3 of the pages the letter is E, but in 5 of them it's O, then the process will decide it's probably O then and not E, and discard the new one. So integrating them cleans them up as well. But even once that process has been completed, there's the occasional error. It varies from recording to recording. Some recordings can be brilliant and almost error-free, others can be absolutely appalling.
And removing the noise, and again, when I found this out, it sort of blew my mind, and you can tell me if I've got this completely wrong. It uses the same sort of algorithm of processing as like when you press on like Photoshop and you take the noise out of an image. It's the same sort of algorithm that you apply to the teletext data, and it gets rid of all the nonsense, so you're only left with the teletext data you want.
Something like that. I'm not familiar with Photoshop, so but yeah, that's basically what it does. It subtracts the noise out.
Which is incredible. So. How has the scene grown? So since this technology was discovered in 2012, maybe this is a question for all of you. How did it grow into a thing where we're now all in a hall in Harrow talking about this technology, and how did it become a thing?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, when I first started recovering teletext services, I put a few frames on Twitter because I didn't really understand Twitter at the time when I first started using it, and it was quickly picked up by Dan Farriman, who's a teletext artist, and he's a massive populariser of teletext on Twitter and on the internet generally. And he got his own set of followers. Rusty Russ as well from Twitter. He also tweeted out a lot, so it kind of grew from those two. Really, I think, just tweeting out a lot of teletext stuff. And when was the first block party? When was that, Peter?
2016.
2016. So we all got together just to sort of to actually meet, I think, really. But we've had loads of visitors come through, and there's lots of interest, and we've done a couple of other shows since, including this one, haven't we? So.
Cool. And Chris, how presumably you got to a point where Digitiser stopped being on the telly, and you must have thought, well, that's it, I can't archive anymore, and then this happened.
Well, exactly. I'd been away from the Digitiser community for some time at this point. I'd left Superpage 58 online as a public service, essentially. Well, if I'm not going to update it, I can at least keep it there for people. Well, I'd forgotten all about it. I'd kind of moved on, and I just happened to see one day, I can't remember what page it was, but there was a recovered page of Teletext. I was like, how is this possible? How are people still doing it? And I found my way to the Teletext.org site, which has a huge archive of Digitiser on there, and I just spent hours poring through it all and reading so many of the pages, saving them immediately, because you never know how long it's going to be before something disappears. So I didn't know what I was going to do with it at the time. I thought, well, I could at least have a copy of it. And it wasn't really until about a year of me being back in the Digitiser community that I decided, actually, look at what's going on here. This is really significant. It's probably about the right time to bring Superpage 58 out of retirement and reboot it. So that's when I decided to redesign it and start it up with regular updates.
And like you say, there's now 1,900 recoveries, I think?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, about 1,900 in the archive. There's quite a few channel 4s in there as well. There's quite a few Digitisers that are still waiting to be cleaned up and published too.
Are there any particular highlights or gems that you've recovered, and you've discovered since, or rediscovered since, that you're particularly, you particularly like, or think are particularly notable?
There's one in particular that always comes to mind. It's not actually from a recovery. It's from original TV card files that Wagoo, I don't know if he's here. Is he here? No. He kindly sent to me. He couldn't even open them anymore at this point. He didn't have the software. But he sent a zip file with all this, and he said, it's probably Digitiser, if you can find a way of opening it. So I didn't know, but there were people online like Peter who did. And I think you were able to update.
Yes, we jumped on it and decoded it for you.
Exactly, and so it was available again. And there were some absolute beauties in there. There was loads of the snakes, there was some brilliant Morse and Lewis. There was one particular reveal from, I think, early '99, where on the letters page somebody had asked, more snakes, we love the snakes, keep bringing the snakes and wrapping shoe. And Biffo replied something like, bad news, the snakes are out, but here's a cat called Derek Croft. And it was just this image of this really obnoxious cat doing a rap with Derek Croft, makes other cats rank. And it just stayed with me. And I can never forget that. I just love it. It's moments like that that what make it worthwhile, I think, and just things that you completely forgot about and would never expect to ever see again. And that moment of joy when you discover them.
How about you guys? Any particular highlights from the recoveries and that sort of thing you've seen?
Well, I came from it from a different point of view, because I worked in Teletext for quite a while, and to test our equipment, I used to leave inserters running, and they would actually capture pages as they worked. So I already had quite a selection of random pages from whichever channel I was working on. So I posted those up, and I think in the early days that was the best we could do. So I was amazed when all this VHS recoveries came along, because it really expanded what was out there.
So knowing how all the technology works, were you, when Alistair discovered or invented VHS recoveries, I mean, did this impress you, or was that something you knew was theoretically possible from your background?
I think I'm a very bad engineer. I knew it was theoretically impossible. VHS just didn't have the bandwidth to do it, but Alistair proved me wrong. So I think there's a job in GCHQ for these guys, decoding signals that you don't think there could be anything worthwhile left there, and getting perfect pages out. So I'm very impressed with that. And even Alistair Cree at the back, he's actually taken good teletext data, and he's fuzzed it up in the way that a VHS player would, so that he can now compare sections to see, is this fuzzed up in the same sort of way, and then it's probably the same thing. So there's a lot of pattern matching going on, and I think the next stage will be artificial intelligence, that people will just throw stuff at it, teach it what to do, and then we'll sort out how to recover stuff.
I think that's what Jason needs with all the video text and stuff stored up.
Because at the moment there's a lot of correcting to do, because it's one of the cliches that when there's a letter E, there's a very good chance it gets replaced by a J. So there's always a bit of manual fixing up to do, but maybe the artificial intelligence will speed that up.
Yeah, in terms of the original question was about highlights, wasn't it? I mean, I think in terms of Digitiser, I mean, as an Amiga user, I never wrote in. I wasn't one of the raving ones. But it was all about Sega and and Nintendo at the time, wasn't it? But as an Amiga user, I used to read the Man every day. That was a highlight for me. Certainly, just the surreal. We had Vic and Boll at the time. At the same time as Digitiser, and it was very much the same sort of surreal humour. But outside Digitiser, there's some really interesting things to be found in that teletext data. You can watch people checking the bank account. You can.
I was going to ask you about this because I remember, it's clear as day in my head, about 15 years ago, I think it was Skytext. Yeah. I was just, because my parents bought a new TV, which was amazing because the zero button worked and I could access pages which had a zero in. But also, it had a feature where you could press like channel up and just go to whatever the next channel on the service was without having to like guess the number or whatever. And I remember just scrolling up and then, seeing basically an online banking interface. And I'm pretty sure it was like Co-op Bank. I could be completely wrong.
It was Co-op.
Oh god, this is clear as day. It's ingrained in my mind for some reason. I was thinking, that's someone's bank account. Who thought that was a good idea?
I mean, not only that, they used to have chat services as well, where people could ring up on the phone and type letters in, and the letters would appear slowly on the screen, so you can be nosy and watch people's conversations there. The BBC had an entire teletext service hidden in the data beneath that as well. It's called Name's Gone.
Press text?
No, not that one.
No.
The one.
Another one?
Yes, the internal internet one.
Oh.
I don't remember. Anyway, there's like it uses the same format, but it's hidden in the data packets that a normal TV can't see. There's that as well. There's all manner of interesting stuff.
I always loved it when I found like an engineering page on Teletext when I was scrolling through. I was thinking, it felt like I was getting the secret knowledge.
Yes. Sometimes you could press a fast text button and it would take you to page 3AA or something like that, and that would be the status page for Foretel.
And that's how what's the quiz on Channel 4 works? I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah,
that's the one. Bamboozle.
Yeah. I mean, they recover quite well. You can play them just the same with the recovered data. So come and have a go of it later on if you like.
I'm definitely going to have a go. So.
Yeah.
If you played the same version of Bamboozle long enough, you would know what the you've lost screen was, and if it came up like 3FF or whatever, it's like, oh, that's wrong. Press the other button.
So before I get up to audience questions, I do want to ask you about the sort of future gazing stuff, because amazingly, and this is again I thought was amazingly cool. Peter actually launched a brand new teletext service in, I think it was 2017, 2016.
It was just before the 2016 block party. I started a service called, I think you called it Fringe Fax, for the Stroud Fringe. And you could see it if you went into selected shops in Stroud. But Block Party came along soon after that, so I thought we'll rebrand it as Teefax and turned it into a service for the teletext community. So it's been running continuously in my living room on a Raspberry Pi for the last 3 or 4 years now.
This is what I think is really cool, because it's not as if you set up a transmitter and we're transmitting teletext pictures over the airwaves, because obviously those are all 4G airwaves now. This is literally pages distributed by Raspberry Pi But then, and I set this when I set this in my living room, I was amazing. I felt like an elite hacker doing this. But basically, you took a Raspberry Pi, ran your software, and you plug it into the TV, and it actually created real teletext. So it's not just like a picture of what teletext should look like. It's real teletext running on the same. You press text on your TV, and Teefax comes up. It was amazing.
So what happened was I used to work at MIG Systems. We'd sell these things called inserters to the BBC. They would cost $5 or $6 grand each. But it was clear that the service was going to be switched off. So in 2010, I looked at making the software for to run my own inserter, and I worked out how to do it for much less, and it cost about £100 to do it with AVRs and stuff. But when the Raspberry Pi came out with Alistair Buxton's software, it turned out that that was all that you needed, a Raspberry Pi. So then I could run my Teefax service over the internet into any Raspberry Pi. It would act as using the similar software to BBC used, and generate a teletext stream in your living room. So that's been running ever since. There is a web viewer if you don't fancy using Raspberry Pi as well. So that's Teefax, and another off branch of it is Alistair Cree. He's done a service especially for today called Chunky Text, and it's using the same basic software platform for that. So anybody who wants to run their teletext service nowadays can do it for peanuts.
And sorry, I get confused about this phrase because I'm a big fan. But the other thing I think is amazing is you can also create dynamic pages. So you think, the way I understand it, I never could get this working, but basically you could take data from the internet and then make it appear on teletext by mashing whatever your software up with like PHP and XML and stuff like that. Because I think there's a page on the sex service over there where you can actually view the Twitter stream in teletext form. Nat Dane has done quite a lot of work on that. I did. I scraped the BBC web pages for news, and so I've got the first 20 pages of Teefax come from the BBC. Nat Dane's done some work on the weather, so there are weather maps. He's working on the sport, so it's not complete yet, but he has a few pages starting at 301 to 305, and somebody else is feeding in live Twitter data in with the teletext hashtag. So Teefax has got quite a bit of automation going on, and whoever wants to edit it can write their own little updater to control their own pages. And Jason, in terms of the future of the recoveries, so you've done 1900. How much teletext do you think is left out there? Could we ever build a sort of near complete archive of all of teletext, or not going to put too much pressure on you, but is that possible? Is it even possible? Do we have the tapes?
Well, I don't know. I've got a big enough pile of tapes at home, so it might all be on there. But no, I mean it's that's a massive undertaking. I think we're going to ever get a sample of that. I think it's you started the first test were in 1974. And I think really the earlier teletext is what interests me, because it was very frontier at the time. In the same way that Digitiser was frontier for teletext, and what's on Teefax is also very frontier. It's all very exciting, and because it's not strictly regulated, and it's not what makes it interesting. But I don't think we'll ever get all of it. I mean, what I do want to do with it is put it online, make it searchable, because there's all sorts of unique resources in there that you just can't get anywhere else. I mean, you have newspaper archives, and they're very special price things, rightly so. But teletext should be on the same footing. There should be an archive of teletext.
Is there like a particular day's teletext you would really like to find, or any sort of what's the phrase, like the golden thing you want to find? And like I'm thinking maybe, I don't know, 9/11's teletext, if that's not too morbid, is there anything like that you're particularly after or looking for?
Well, I mean, as a sort of a going off the beaten track of it. I mean, with the 9/11 you mentioned there, I mean, websites were crashing on 9/11, but people could still get information from teletext because it was broadcast. It wasn't downloaded. So teletext stayed up where websites went down. A particular day. Well, I think I forgot what the phrase.
Yeah, there is a phrase, isn't there? I'm not going to say.
Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail, that's the one, yes. What's that Holy Grail of teletext?
Yeah, one of those was when Oracle closed in 1992 because they didn't go down quietly. They made a right fuss about being switched off. That was one of the Holy Grails, but with that turned up, we've got a really good copy of that now. So you can watch Oracle in its death throes, and then you can watch teletext coming up for the first time with Biffo's "Welcome to Teletext" graphic. It's the first thing that you see.
I think the TV listings for that are great because after midnight it's all hell. No, they didn't take it lightly, did they?
But they turned up, yeah. So that was really good. Another fabled bit of teletext apparently is from the very early days when the first editor of Teefax, Colin McIntyre. Apparently, the story goes, he used to put messages on a secret page for his wife to say, "I'll be coming home at 6 o'clock." That would be really something to find, but yeah, the tapes are hard to come by. The earliest one I have, a full copy of, is 1979. I've got a bit of one of a series from 1976, and that's interesting in itself because it uses the old control codes. So I mean, Peter was talking earlier that it was only standardised in 1976. The teletext before that was different codes doing different things. So code 7 might not have been white; it might have been blue, for example. So the codes are different. So, but yeah, so those are the earliest ones that I have from 1976. So just keep trying to find earlier and earlier.
So is that why, this is a very nerdy digression, I'm sorry, but is that why if you look at older recoveries, the sort of graphics seem to be less sophisticated than like teletext from like 2005 or something?
Yeah, I mean exactly. I mean it was very much a new thing at the time. They didn't know what they were doing with it. They didn't know what to do with teletext, what its strengths were. They very much had to just feel around in the dark to find out what they could do with it. There was one section where you could enter the time. In the clock section, and they didn't even know what to do with that. They put a page on Teefax to say, "Can anybody think of a use for this function?" So all the public could come up with ideas. So at the start it was very rough and ready, very frontier, as I say. That was before it got professionalised, if you like, and slick, like in the later years.
Cool, and I think now, because we've got about 15 minutes left, let's open it up to the audience. Does anyone in the audience have a burning teletext question? Over there?
Have you got a radio mic?
Could someone volunteer to do the microphone wrangling?
It's like question time, is it? Lady in the room jumping.
See if it works.
This is better than question time because we don't have Nigel Farage on the panel.
Can I hear myself?
Can I hear myself? There we go.
Hello, thank you for a fascinating panel. My question is, if you've inspired someone in this room to undertake recovery themselves, is that something that we can do? Is it practical? If I've got a stack of old videotapes, what would be the process to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, lots of people got involved. I mean, initially there was only me and Alistair doing it, I think, for a while, but of late there's a group on the Discord website, and there's a few of us on there, and there's got to be something 8 to 10 people doing it, I think, at present that I know of. So lots of people have done it, and you certainly can join in. Yeah, you do need a particular capture card, but Alistair Creative App will fill you in with what the Discord address is. So you join in on that group. Loads of people on there that can help, and we'll get you started.
What sort of gear do we need? Should I have a VHS player, and then what? How do you do it? What do you have?
You need a VHS player, of course. You need a computer with a PCI socket, because the card that's used as a PCI card, it doesn't quite work with USB yet. I've done a bit of work trying to get it to work with USB, and it kind of does, but the sample rate isn't big enough. It's not as clear as doing it with PCI. So I basically use the USB input, resampled it, and put it through Alice's software, but it's not as good as the PCI card. So yeah, I think you did the computer, PCI card, Linux we need, because the drivers only exist in Linux to run it. But yeah, there's loads of help that we can do that to get started.
You've got the VHS player.
Oh yeah, well I'm a VHS player, yeah. And a Betamax. I've got a good Beta player as well. I don't think anybody else is doing Beta apart from me. But yeah, I'm old enough to remember it.
Any more questions? Down the front?
At the front? 1 moment.
Sorry, I'll promise make you run around.
Hello, yeah, great panel. Just wondering, is it David? Peter, sorry. Did the companies like Teefax or the BBC rather, did they actually care about teletext? Or were you just kind of in a cupboard doing it somewhere and they just let you get on with it?
I didn't have anything to do editorially, just supplied the equipment, but they were very strict on how their packets left the building, the teletext packets. Everything had to be on the right line and in the right order, and they'd complain if stuff wasn't correct, and it was our fault because we gave them the equipment to test it with, so so they could spot if anything was untoward. I don't know how the editorial works. Is that what you were thinking about?
Well, kind of, but just, I mean, did you kind of have the facilities that you felt you needed to do it all properly?
I wasn't even at that end. I was in the machine room, and we were putting our blue boxes in and configuring them and making sure the lines were set up right, and telling them how they got it wrong. But the BBC would I talked to their boffin, and he'd come up with some great ideas, saying we're going to send signals to control TiVo machines, and so then I'd come up with a little box that generates signals that TiVo machine can decode, and then they'd go away, and what they did with it, I don't know. That was something that they dropped because I think for some reason TiVo vanished it just shortly after that. But no, I was doing other stuff which wasn't even seen on any screens outside the BBC. They had a scheduling system called Teefax, which would my software went straight into their scheduling machine, saw what was going to happen to the 25th of a second, and then it would transmit that out to all the regions. And because it went out over teletext, it was very quick, and so the regions would know exactly what was going to happen, and they'd have special teletext screens to decode that and keep everything running smoothly. That only got switched off a couple of years ago, so they were still running teletext, but internally where you couldn't see it. I know Mr. Biffo, he has talked about his stuff. You've probably seen him talk about that. He seemed to get away with an awful lot. So I think they went under the radar. They just managed to sneak in stuff which didn't get checked properly because they didn't think it mattered. But no, I didn't actually have anything to do with the. I was all at the transmission end at the television centre up in the top floor of the machine room.
Cool. Anything else? Just down front.
I've actually got two questions if we've got enough time. One, I seem to remember Channel 4 early 90s around season 4-ish of Games Master. They did an interactive thing whereby people used an IRC or a BBS to put comments in and they used the subtitles to display it. But nobody else, when I mentioned that to them, they all look at me like I'm purple. And I didn't do a lot of drugs at university, but I do seem to remember that was the thing that happened. I wondered if the panel was aware of that.
Yeah, I can remember I don't know if it was even IRC. I think Mythos said it was actually a phone line that people had to ring in and tell them what the message was, and they hated having to do it. If everyone has, because they had to stay late in the office and have to have Games Master on and be typing up all the messages as subtitles on going out at the time. So it was really rudimentary, but I remember that as well. Yeah, they would take this out. It was on screen as well, like these are adverts and all that kind of thing. Yeah, it was fun while it lasted.
Wonderful, thank you. The other question is, it feels like there's a sort of, like a 30-year block of nascent technology from the late 70s to the noughties, pre-internet, but it's like post-print. The Doomsday Machine system with the Laserdisc and the BBC Master, and it takes real dedicated individuals to basically have to go and reverse engineer this stuff from poor documentation so that it can be archived. So I really just wanted to say thank you. That you know, I've got a 6-year-old. I'm trying to introduce her to retro stuff. That I'll be able to. Daddy, what are you going on about? Teletext. This was a thing. This meant everything to me when I was a teenager. So yeah, just thank you to everyone who sort of technically made it work.
I'd just like to add that I worked on one of these systems where you could send a text in and it would appear on a particular teletext page, and I did all the software for it, so it came in, it went straight into the inserter and then that went straight out onto air, and I looked at it and I thought, people paying £1 to say sup. And then you get a reply, nothing much. What about you? And you think, yeah, I just want another £1 gone, another £1 gone. So I wasn't surprised to see that go really fast.
I do remember those. You did seem to get like budding friendships and romances even going on there. Like there'd be a couple of users who were writing messages to each other, and they'd have really long and involved conversations. Like, how much did you actually spend to do this?
I do have one of those on recovery there. Someone is saying, Graham, we need to talk about things. I must watch the whole thing to see how it pans out. Well, getting back to games.
So that's the Holy Grail tape. That's the one where you find out the end of the story.
Well, yeah, it's top shelf from Holy Grail tape. I think getting back to Games Master, I mean, if anyone's got an original copy of VHS, then we'll be able to get those subtitles out using the recovery.
That would be amazing to see.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Time for one more question, I think, folks. Or three, if they're quick.
Let's take 3 in one go, and then we'll.
Right.
Everyone ask as quick as you can.
Yeah. In the middle, then pass it over. Oh, push the thingy up. Technology.
Right, there you go. It wasn't really touched on much, but one of the things we couldn't get originally in the archives, a lot of it at the time was the level 2 teletext, because nobody really had the hardware at the time. So do you think, probably many of you just, do you think we found most of what is out there, or do you think there's a lot more stuff we found for the test level 2 stuff?
But before you answer, let's say the other questions, that way we can rattle through them.
Okay.
Yep.
Apart from Digitiser, what else from Teletext do you think could be converted to a live stage show? And don't say that,
And finally?
Hi, it might be vaporware, but do you have any idea of the thought that Team 17 once developed worms for teletext? Did it exist?
I think it came out on April the 1st.
There's some examples recently recovered. I'm sure I've seen some.
Yeah,
there was a blog announcing it.
Yeah, it was a sort of a team effort, fraud, April Fool. That was. Yeah, I mean, I tweeted that out as well. So you can place. I'm on that one. Level 2.5. I think we probably found most of it. I don't think there's very much to be found. Maybe in the European teletext might be a good place to live.
And what was the other question?
And what would be good as a live stage? So what about, I don't know if you remember the after hours section of teletext. Might be one. Two of the worms said is sick. No, don't do that one.
Cool. So on that note, let's wrap things up and let's just give our panel a huge round of applause. Let's thank you to Chris.